Hello everybody, how are you? It's Mike Andrew, once again providing a short video with practical insights as it applies to business and leadership. You know, most of my videos are about practical day-to-day leadership insights, but I also want to balance that a little bit with business insights. So today I'm going to talk more about business, that executive perspective. When we say thinking strategically, what does that mean? And it's really, to me, it's about having that executive perspective. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some excerpts from my book, How to Think Like a CEO and Act Like a Leader. So this is more about how to think like a CEO piece. And you know, there's a chapter in the book that's entitled What They Do Teach You in Business School. And the reason why I use that chapter is years ago there was a very well-known book, successful book called What They Don't Teach You in Harvard Business School by a man named Mark McCormick. And that was all about the practical day-to-day things to be an effective executive. Well, this is what they do teach you. So let me give you some examples of how to think strategically, how to think with that executive perspective. And I think these principles are pretty fundamental, and they apply even today in a fast-moving global economy and in the many technological changes happening and so forth. First and foremost, when I had a consulting practice years ago, I would customize strategic leadership programs around each company's strategic context. And I would have these conversations, one-on-one conversations with members of the executive team. And they love to have these conversations, by the way. Executives love to talk about the business. And I would ask a series of questions, and they would give me the time, and I found that the more they articulated about the business, the better they were getting a grasp of the business. So here we go. So in order for me to do my job, I would ask a series of questions. I would get to the first level of context, which is the external environment. I would ask them questions around what keeps them awake at night with changes and trends externally, such as competitive threats. You know, what's happening with your competition? What's happening with the pace of change in the industry and the marketplace? How are the customers changing? What are some of the regulatory issues they have to deal with? What about the fast pace of technology and the technological trends and so forth? So we would get at those external factors that keep them awake at night that are pretty much out of their control, but they have to be aware of. I would bring the questions down to a second level, and it would be around, based on what we just talked about externally, how does that translate? How does that translate, and how do you align your company direction, your goals, strategies, vision to what's happening externally so you can compete better? Then I would bring the questions down to a third level and say, based on what we just talked about with those first two levels of context, externally and internally, what are those 3 or 4 capabilities that your company needs to be the best at, second to none, that you really need to distinguish yourself, to leverage, to be who you say you want to be, to realize your vision, to execute your strategies, to achieve your goals? And they loved having those conversations, and that would form the context for me to create these strategic leadership programs, to make them relevant to the business context. There's another way of looking at executive perspective or strategic thinking. You may have heard of Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker has been recognized as probably the most prolific or one of the most renowned management thinkers of the 20th century. And I'm going to quote some questions from Peter Drucker that's in this book, in my chapter, that he suggested that executives should always be aware of and should always be thinking about. So bear with me as I read, because I wrote this book a while ago, so I have to read it. Even though I wrote it, I have to read it. Questions such as, how is your competitive environment changing in terms of customer needs and demands? Describe your current competitive environment in terms of your largest competitors, your lowest cost producers, those with the technological leader, you know, those with the highest quality and so forth, getting a good sense of what your competition looks like. What is your firm's strategic intent? And is it consistent? Is it aligned to the external environment, the context that we were talking about? What are your company's distinctive capabilities? Another thing that we talked about. What do you need to be the best at in order to be who you say you want to be? What values characterize your company? Is it short-term profit, long-term growth, being innovative, cost control? Another question is, what function dominates the senior leadership of your company? Is it the technology area? Is it the business units in sales? Is it operations? Is it finance? Because that tells you a lot. And how must your company adjust its vision, strategies, mission, goals based on how the business, the industry, and the marketplace is changing? We have to keep on top of that. So that's Peter Drucker. Let me move on to a practitioner, very well known executive, Jack Welch, the former chairman and CEO of GE. When he was chairman and CEO of GE, I think the market value of GE increased about $500 billion or close to it. He used to ask a series of questions that he said that all of the executives in GE should be thinking about. And his the questions Jack Welch recommended his executives be thinking about. What does your global competitive environment look like? In the last 3 years, what have your competitors done? In the same period, the last 3 years, what have you done to your competitors? How might our competitors attack us in the future? And what can we do to leapfrog our competition? You notice there's a similarity between Welch and Drucker and in the approach that I took at the beginning of this video. And then there's the old traditional, I love this one, the SWOT, S-W-O-T, the SWOT analysis. One of the most simple, fundamental, yet effective ways of thinking strategically and thinking with that executive perspective. S-W-O-T. S being, what are our strengths that we need to leverage and take advantage of in the marketplace to be more competitive? The W, what are our weaknesses? Where are we vulnerable to attack from our competition? The O is, what are the opportunities that are out there? What are the evolving trends that we need to stay on top of and take advantage of? And the T are, what are the threats? What are the competitive threats that we have to be aware of out there? So these were just ways of thinking strategically with that executive perspective that I wanted to share with you, something different from the overall practical day-to-day leadership. I hope this was worth your while. I hope you found it effective. As always, I always am encouraged when I see the thumbs up or comments. Please continue to do so. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.